Sound and data.
Hello, Scott.
Yeah, Greg, how you doing, man?
There you are. I'm
Yeah,
okay. How are you? Long time.
yeah, it's been too long. Anyway, the nature of this is that I'm doing this like comprehensive look into the history of who's done what in sonification, and of course, your name came up. Greg Kramer is like on all the initial papers about the concept from the early '90s. Um, so my first question regarding all this is like, how did all that get started? What was going on?
Well, um, I guess the first thing is that there was the perspective from my own, uh, my own work, and
Sure.
then there's also the question of what was happening in the field and how those came together. Because for me, I was a member of the Santa Fe Institute
Right.
and interested in complex systems. And uh, on one of the visits that I took out there to do some work, uh, I had this kind of personal epiphany about representing these systems, complex systems with sound, because there were so many dimensions, so hard to understand these things.
Right.
And, looking at what they were trying to do with graphical displays and stuff, uh, very hard to understand, any kind of chaotic system in multiple dimensions. On the other hand, um, sound had this multidimensional capacity and all this kind of thing. And it was like just a really exciting notion to me because at the time I was, in addition to being a scientist, a composer. So,
Right.
uh,
I remember that part.
yeah. So,
I mean, I was at those
uh,
early ICAD meetings, and I think it's where we met, and maybe around also the hub stuff and or
hmm
early
hmm
hub. But
Right.
so at the Santa Fe Institute, were you working with James Crutchfield and that group, or uh,
Yeah, that's the era in which I was there. James Crutchfield, Chris Langton, um, Murray Gelman was there,
right,
and
right,
right. So when I had this idea, I thought, oh, well, this is incredibly exciting. This notion of representing data with sound.
right.
Let me find out what's been done. And I was expecting, as I began to do my research, which was really, it was pre-World Wide Web. It was the late '80s.
Yeah,
Uh,
I remember those
I
days.
kept expecting to find some treasure trove of all this research that had been done, and I didn't. There was really almost nothing out there. I came across a few papers, literally a few papers, and that was it. There was one paper by Sarah Bly that was, I think it was her PhD dissertation, and maybe there was a publication that came out of it as well. Um, and there was, well, once I started to get a little bit of traction, I found a paper by Stu Smith and his colleagues at Lowell, University of Massachusetts.
Okay.
Um, and I found, let's see, there was Bill Buxton had done something. I don't know if he had actually done sonification so much as advocated very heavily for a more clever use of sound with computation.
Right.
And Bill Gaver was in that direction too with but he was doing a auditory, an orally enhanced finder for the Mac, so that
Yeah.
you would have basically sound effects when you did things.
Yeah.
Uh,
That's the one that stuck. And Buxton's works, but Stu Smith and Sarah Bly don't come up that much. And then there's Bruce
no,
Walker, right?
Bruce Walker was much, much, much later.
Oh, that's
Yeah,
much. Okay, yeah. I'm just
yeah,
going.
yeah.
I'm just remembering the papers that I'm referring to, and stuff. So,
Yeah, no, Bruce got going after he and I hooked up when he came to ICANN. Uh, so so so
yeah.
by that time, something was beginning to coalesce. But anyway, so there was this kind of experience of this is really interesting. Let's see what's out there. Not finding anything,
Right.
and then making the decision to go ahead and create a workshop at Santa Fe Institute for this field, which is what was and what evolved into ICAD, the International Conference on Auditory Display.
Right.
And in order to find the people to attend such a workshop, I had to work really hard to even dredge them up. I was contacting large companies trying to find out, is anyone there doing anything with auditory representations, and it was it took me a really long time to dredge up I think that we ended up with 36 people at ICAD, the first workshop.
Well,
and every single one was a custom invitation.
Yeah, what I remember is meeting a guy that was doing like ringtones for Philips or something like that, and I thought, ringtones, that could possibly be something,
Yeah.
It turned into this billion-dollar industry, so.
No, you've got a good point there. In some sense, I thought that I was going to really pursue the sonification thing as the center point, but there was nothing almost at all going on. And so I had to open it up wider and wider, right? So I ended up with, people who were using sound with computation for almost anything,
Yeah.
And so, I got one guy from IBM, and I got one guy from, one woman was doing some very good work at NASA. She's still involved, Beth Wenzel.
Yeah, Beth,
but that
for
was,
sure.
Sound spatialization, right? She wasn't doing sonification as such, but now it was broadening into auditory display broadly, right? But
that's sort of incredible. You'd think there'd be something going on, especially as at that point the whole thing was burgeoning, and this has been sort of what I've found about sonification in general, looking at it from a historical perspective, that it's never quite caught for some reason. It doesn't really catch on. There's, other than Gavher's things of like the mail sound going when you send a mail on a Mac, that kind of thing. But
yeah, I would say that that's true, and.
This is the but I like.
Yeah, there is an increasing appreciation in a few application areas for how sound is important and has otherwise unavailable capacities.
Right.
One of them, just to state the obvious, is in VR and games, where you have not only the obvious sound effects, but a lot of that stuff gets more and more informative as you go forward.
Exactly.
People who are gamers. I mean, I'm not a gamer, so I can't speak with any insight. But they are really constantly judging, assessing their environment and their game situation by sound, because they are there's a lot of information required to play optimally, and their eyes are so busy and their hands and brains are so busy with the rest of the information that they're processing.
Right.
So that's one thing, one place where you wouldn't be referring to that in any strict way as data sonification, in the sense of taking data, representing it with sound, and getting some quantitative assessment as a result. On the other hand, what you are getting is a lot more than, let's say, just the sound effects of so-and-so shot a gun or so-and-so ran into a wall or whatever. You're getting, you're getting something more like you would get with, let's say, radar weather, where you're getting a global assessment of a complex scene that would be very difficult, if not impossible, to present simultaneously with all the visual data.
Right. And so in the early work, there was a computational load that we have transcended at this point too. So I think it's more ripe now to try to think in terms of those environmental approaches, don't you?
I do. And I still think that your original point, though, is why hasn't this caught on, will remain an issue anyway. Um, Meaning that, yes, we've crossed some computational thresholds. There's a lot more capacity out there. The tools for creating sound and controlling sound are far, far better.
No kidding.
People are familiar with sound. People expect good sound. So all of that is better. And of course, we still have the cultural bias in especially scientific data
Yes.
around visualization, right, rather than auditory representations.
Yeah.
So there's still some difficulties, but you're right. The technological difficulties are far less, but I think we're still on the cognitive and perceptual front, looking for where are the affordances, and then where in the, let's call it a marketplace,
Yeah.
where in the market is this really going to break through. And like I say, I think VR and gaming is one area, but I think also I'm seeing, or shall I say, surmising is really all I can say,
Exactly.
that the sophistication with which sound design has evolved in, say, cinema, the sophistication with which people expect and absorb information publicly, I think is changing. And I've seen where some people like Stephen Barris is wanting to apply theatrical strategies to data sonification.
Yeah, I mean, David Stout, this guy has called it not sonification, but data dramatization. But I really reached out to you because of this idea of what the heck happened, you know? Why didn't it like just take off like wildfire? I'm reminded of the Hub, which we also thought was going to be like the rage, you know. We're still the only.
Right.
It sort of has. I mean, there's laptop music and there's network music, but it hasn't really caught on like it did. And I remember talking to you back then, and both of us, everyone in that area thought this was going to be the next thing. You know, this thing since sliced bread. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there's also, I wouldn't want to discount that in little ways, incremental ways, perhaps.
Yeah.
There's a preparing the seedbed for when something that we might call a killer app is going to come through. And one of those places is the auditory feedback that you're getting in factory machinery and medical equipment. These things have been around a long time.
Yeah.
But they too are incrementally improving. They're getting not only more sophisticated and so on, and having other kinds of information that they need to present. But also remember, a critical piece is, will we use it? So what's happening is there's simultaneously there's the education of the users.
Right.
Right. Now, I'm not savvy enough. I'm not on the inside, but I wouldn't doubt at all that the exact same thing that I just mentioned for manufacturing or medical is happening in all kinds of military applications that I'm not aware of.
Well, we did get funded by DARPA to do some work in this area this last year, and we've been working with complex networks. I mean, what you were describing is exactly what we were paid to work on. So it's still going on, but I'm fascinated that it hasn't caught on, at least somewhere in one specific area. Listen, I'll just have one last question. and that is you no longer are involved in ICAD or sonification. Do you want to speak to why you stepped out of that? It was your practice, or just your life change, or what was that all
Well,
about?
yeah, yeah. I don't know if it's interesting to your listeners or not,
Well,
Scott, but
just briefly, you know.
it wasn't so much stepping out as letting go because my focus shifted.
Right.
You know, for my whole life, I've been practicing quite intensively Buddhist meditation, and I began teaching also a very long time ago, about 35 years ago.
Yeah.
And starting in the late 90s, there's a relational or dialogic meditation practice I developed that just got increasingly compelling in its impact and drew me entirely to give my focus to that.
Right.
And so I've been traveling all over the world teaching this practice of insight dialogue for, for a lot of years now. And if you wanted to find out more about that, you could go to metta.org, metta.org. But the basic notion is that it extends the intentions and the impact of traditional meditation into relational practice.
Well, fantastic, Greg. These are just short little, tidbits, but you gave us a kernel of something very interesting, and I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me, and I look forward to talk to you soon again.
It's fun to reconnect, Scott. I wish you well.
It totally is. Sound and data.